Lisa,
Yes, baby girl.
when I grow up, I want to be a menace to society.
Then so shall you be.
I started on this research path 10 years ago, and one of the results of that so far is this book where I only focus in the book, Epidemic America's Trade in Child Rape. I only focus on government employees because to me, that's the most egregious. These are people paid with our tax money who are supposed to be public servants. And in fact, what they're doing is using their government position, which is a very privileged position of power, to rape and traffic children for their own benefits, both financially and the sexual pleasure that they get out of doing this. And it's very, very sadistic. And, I detail all the criminal complaints of these arrests of government employees. So you can see what these guys are saying when they're on pedophile chat lines because it's outlined in the criminal complaints by the courts. And they like to harm the children. They get very sexually stimulated by causing the children to bleed, by seeing them cry, so they usually brutally, violently assault the children first, and that causes them, the pedophiles, to get aroused, and then they rape the children. So there's this horrific synergy of male misogynistic violence and sexuality linked to that. And it's much easier to do that to a child that's under your complete control than it is to do that to a 40 or 50 or 30-year-old woman. So it's not that they have a sexual preference for children. It's that children are easier to rape and abuse, and you can get away with it. You have impunity. And certainly if you've been granted sole custody by a judge and you have total control over your 4-year-old daughter, you can rape her with impunity. You can traffic her with impunity because everybody in the system, is the lawyers, the family court, the guardian ad litem, they're all in on it, and they've helped you do that. So that's the position that these men are in, and it's very hard for mothers like me or Nash Holt to fight that kind of system, especially when the women's movement and the liberal feminist, progressive women who claim that they're supposed to be helping women and mothers and children like me and Nash Holt don't do anything. They said I was such a narcissist that I had an inability to love or care about anybody, and that's why my child had to be taken away from me, because the lawyer, Michael Waxman, for my ex-husband, he loved my daughter in a way that I couldn't love her. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
That doesn't make any sense.
If we could get one federal investigator to actually sit down and read any of these court documents, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's all right there. It's not like, I think the worst is, it's not like any of this is subtle. None of it's subtle. It's very obvious, horrific corruption and horrific documentation of abuse of children and mothers in family courts. And nobody's doing anything because the sociopaths are all in charge.
Yeah, it does seem like we have a lot of sociopaths in charge of stuff, or people who are working within the system and can't speak out because something bad will happen to them. They'll lose their jobs, they could get harmed, they'll be vilified and ostracized, so they probably don't speak out for those reasons. I think
And they see what happens to people who do speak out,
Oh yeah, you get punished. When you tell the truth, you will be punished. If you say things that people do not want said or promoted, you will face backlash.
Right. And they don't want to go to jail, so they'll do anything to protect what they're doing, which means destroying anybody who's trying to expose it in a credible way.
Yeah, that does happen.
Or if they also self-deprecate and pretend that it's glamorous to be a quote-unquote bad mother, that's very damaging.
And it's very funny. Those acts are very funny. I did a lot of that type of stuff. It was used against me. You know what I'm saying? Jokes are jokes. They have comedians and media people out there tweeting about raping babies. So my joke about tequila all of a sudden means, by the way, I've never had a DUI. I've never had a drunken disorderly in public. I've never had an altercation. I've never been in a bar fight. None of that. So, and I'm from New Orleans, so we drink. That's our culture. But that being said, we handle it. The guy who sexually assaulted me actually ran his car into a Motel 6 a few months ago. Slammed his car during happy hour. I'm not saying the gent was drunk.
Here's the thing. I was a goddamn Girl Scout. I didn't even have a late library book fine to my name or a parking ticket when this happened. And my ex-husband was a criminal alien from the former Yugoslavia who had pled guilty to domestic assault against me and the baby when she was 3 months old. Lied to the Federal Immigration and Customs Authority on his immigration forms, right, about his background in the Balkan War and everything else, had pled guilty to shoplifting, had a very long documented record of violent abuse, had put a 16-year-old kid into a coma and permanent disability by kicking his brains in when he was 16 years old. We got all those court records from what he did as a juvenile. You know, he has this very long record of violence and abuse. And there I am, without a parking ticket to my name, a Girl Scout, basically, a humanitarian and a professor who ran for Congress in Maine, who's from Maine, right? Mm-hmm. Who's known in Maine for years. And I get characterized as this dangerous, bad, horrific mother.
Well, you picked him. You picked him, right. Laurie. You married him. It's your fault. You shouldn't have done it.
He gets sole custody? Are you kidding me? I mean, if you've probably gone down my Medium profile, but I have pinned up on my Twitter, the first pin, and on my Medium, I have a whole series of phone calls with all child protection in Maine that handled my case. There were 18 different caseworkers assigned.
Oh my gosh.
To my case. And yes, and I recorded many of the phone calls, and I had a caseworker tell me, a senior supervisor, that I wasn't credible, but that my ex-husband was credible. So I tried to walk him through what makes this man credible. He has domestic violence, shoplifting, fraud, violent abuse of a child that permanently disabled the child. He's from the former Yugoslavia. He had no degree beyond high school. So why is he credible compared to me, who has zero criminal record, right? Mm-hmm. Who has a PhD, who ran for Congress, who has been a humanitarian working in refugee camps? I'm not credible, but this guy's credible? Because I have a vagina, that's why I'm not credible, and he has a penis. And
women lie. You're lying. Stop lying.
Oh my God.
You're lying about your ex.
I want to take around a white dildo and pull it out of my bag and say, look, I've got a white penis, so therefore I can commit crimes with impunity and I can be called credible, because that's the only thing. It's so gendered and it's so misogynistic.
It is racial though too, like you're saying. It's very racial. I know that my partner is a woman of color, and Richard Corley sent her a text offering to impregnate her. We didn't ask for that text. She was not flirting with him. She was actually speaking about her nieces and how she doesn't have children of her own. And he offered to knock her up if I could somehow untie his tubes. I'm paraphrasing. Oh. Right. Do you think, Dr. Handrahan, do you think that if a black man texted Richard Corley's partner, his wife, with that kind of nonsense, you don't think that black man would have been, stuffed into a cell and something bad would have happened to him down at the police station?
Absolutely. Black men are bending over to tie their shoelaces on the sidewalk and getting charged with obstructing the sidewalk. Yeah. So, it is very, these crimes, these racketeering crimes that are taking place in family courts across the country against mothers and children are happening within the context of our broken justice system, and it's been a justice system that has been designed to criminalize black people. So the New York Times ran a really good article, this is a couple of years ago now, called Jane Crow, and I think if you Google Jane Crow, it'll come up. And the phenomena is, we don't have Jim Crow in America anymore, which is sort of the racial segregation, after the civil rights movement. We have Jane Crow, where black women are having their children taken away for nothing.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
That's happening. Well, they make so much money. They get your kid out, then the state gets money, then they can put their foster kid.
And what nobody's doing, so a lot of the people who work who have salaries, unlike me, in organizations that claim to be doing anti-trafficking work, the anti-trafficking community now publicly acknowledges that foster care is a major supplier of trafficked children.
I was going to ask you about that. Epstein, right? Didn't they have girls that had gone through foster care were given over to him? The CPS people were giving him these girls to rape and traffic.
What I'm saying. Right, so here's the disconnect. So the anti-trafficking community, many of them here in D.C., people who have health insurance and salaries to do this work, which I don't, and they won't hire me, they will now acknowledge that foster care is a major source. So when the kids are hitting the streets at 12, 13, 11, they're running out of foster care, they're getting pinned down. But they're not following that line back and saying, so if foster care is a major source of trafficking children, and that's acknowledged, it was actually acknowledged, Lisa, in the U.S. State Department Trafficking in Person report this year for the first time.
Well, that's progress.
America's foster care, so it's been recognized by the State Department. Then why aren't we investigating the the child protection officers who work in the foster care system who are putting these kids into foster care. So if you take, like, if my ex, suddenly was gone tomorrow, I'm concerned that I wouldn't even get my daughter back. They'd put her in foster care. So you put a kid in foster care to make them vulnerable. And child protection workers are putting kids with pedophile foster parents. It's widely known that pedophiles have infiltrated the foster care system and offer themselves as foster parents. So, this is the thing. I don't understand how the anti-trafficking community can say foster care, is trafficking children without then ordering and asking for and demanding massive federal investigations of Health and Human Services employees, Because a lot of the kids that go through this family court brutal machine of abuse end up in foster care, right? And then they get trafficked. So.
Well, then you just answered your question. That's why they're not investigating the investigators.
Right.
Yeah. It'll close down the pipe.
Right, exactly. Close down the pipeline. And the Epstein story is starting to bring all of this to light, finally, in a credible way, where mainstream media is starting to talk about it. And mainstream America, who's never had any of these things happen to them, is starting to understand how real this is, right? Like the Epstein thing that he wanted to impregnate women at his ranch in New Mexico and have lots of babies. Like, that's now become part of mainstream discussion, which is great, because before that was all just in the conspiracy world,
Like Putin, right? Putin, he's the dude over in Russia. He's prime minister, president. I don't know what his title is over there. But he actually said that they weren't going to have any more Russian babies coming to America because of all the pedophiles over here. Mm-hmm. And now you're talking about, and we're talking about, and the media is talking about how these kids are getting trafficked through foster care and ending up with Epstein. He wasn't wrong in a way, right, Putin?
No, well, Russia, and it was, not Putin specifically, but I'm sure he had a quote about that, but the Russian government, and that's been known because fake adoption agencies have been known for years to be major child traffickers. Also out of Ethiopia, a lot of children are being trafficked who aren't orphans, who have parents. Who are trafficked. And if you go on my Medium profile, some of the child pornography cases that I've profiled, the pedophiles had gone and got orphans out of Russia. In fact, a very prominent one in Rhode Island, as a matter of fact, with, what's the famous prep school, Town Hill? Am I remembering correctly?
Federal Hill? That's where all the mafia is. That's in Providence.
Is there a prep school called Town?
Oh, wait, I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the name of it either, but I remember seeing that the prep school covered up child abuse, child sexual abuse for decades.
Well, the guy who was running it got an orphan from Russia, and I've done so many cases that sometimes I blank. Oh, it was Tower Hill, wasn't it? That's pretty common knowledge that orphanages and orphan agencies that traffic in orphans, and in fact, UN reports have been done on this and things like that. This is how bad it is, Lisa. So I'm just Googling to try to find this one case that I remember. If I type in prep school child sex abuse headmaster, so many cases come up. There's one here in Florida that ABC News reported on. That's what I also tell people in my research. I never do non-mainstream media because it is out there, but it's always out there in one-off media reports, and nobody's sort of put together the whole pattern of what's going on here. So there's tons of prep school child sex abuse headmaster articles. So here's one: headmaster leaving after prep school sex abuse investigation in Rhode Island. This was St. George's School Board of Trustees announced in 2016 that Eric Peterson would not have his contract. So this is a prep school, an Episcopal school in Middletown near Newport. What isn't happening is understanding the pipeline of children, the grooming process, the damage, the impunity for the elite guys, how to stop this from happening over and over and over again, right? And that goes into higher education. Higher education researchers, professors, and think tanks, we're supposed to put together social science research data to say, this is what's happening in our communities, this is what's happening in our country. And when you have so many pedophiles in higher education, I think that, we've had a hard time getting any of this research done because there are so many male professors who are pedophiles who don't want that research done. right?
Yeah, that makes sense. What's next? I know that you've got a lot of projects going. Your book, again, is available at Amazon.com.
Right.
And
Yes.
you have new research that you're doing this summer, yeah?
Yeah. So what out of the book, one of the chapters was on educators, and so what I'm now doing, I've been blessed. I have a group of a couple of volunteer research assistants this summer, and we're putting together 200 cases of professors and staff in higher education across the country who have been arrested and prosecuted on child sex trafficking charges. And we're going to hopefully make a database public. So we're taking a whole bunch of variables so we can get statistics to give to journalists, so we can say these are just some statistics, but they're indicative of a larger problem. And hopefully I'm trying to do a peer review academic journal article on child sex trafficking in higher education. Because again, back to the racism element, journalists and researchers who are looking at this love to look at the African American inner city black pimps. So there's this vilification of a black man who's trafficking children on the street. And for sure, those are bad people and they're doing a lot of harm, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. But nobody wants to look at the white elite president of a university who's trafficking children, or the dean of the school who's trafficking children, or the general counsel for the university who's trafficking children. And so that's what I want to do. And hopefully we'll be able to come up with a pretty good academic, highly credible research article about professors and staff who are involved in child sex trafficking in America, and a public database. And that would just be a sample, which, would need somebody who has a fully funded position, paid like I don't, and health care like I don't have, and retirement, and research money, to actually do full-scale research and say, okay, of the 40,000 federal child pornography, child sex trafficking prosecutions that have happened within a certain time period in America, say 2006 to 2013, we know 97.1% are white men, but we don't know how many were pediatric oncologists, how many were foster care parents, how many were in the Boy Scouts, how many were in the Boys and Girls Club, right? How many were in positions of power who had access to children? And if we could do that kind of research and start to really understand how these institutions work to allow predators to use their employment in these institutions to sexually abuse and exploit children and women, then we might be getting someplace in this country that would be positive.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lori Handrahan. Y'all, please do find Lori Handrahan online, y'all. She has a website. You can also find her on Twitter, Dr. Lori Handrahan. And find me at lisalandry.com. You can sign up there for my YouTube channel. You'll know when each new podcast drops every Womanist Wednesday. Podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Libsyn, and Google Play. Shout out, Ari Bear. I love you. I haven't been to Maine in a very long time. I took you there once when you were a baby because I had a gig there, and Kim came with us, actually, and she babysat you while I told my jokes. That was a long time ago. I don't think we're going to go back there anytime soon, son.